If you're an opponent of Israel's genocide who lives in the United States, and hello from Wisconsin, then the choice ahead of you is grim indeed. There is Kamala Harris, vice president in an administration which has armed and facilitated Israel's genocide from day one, who herself was the star performer at the 2017 policy conference of AIPAC, the main pro-Israel lobby here, and who's offered zero evidence that she intends to break from the current administration's policy of make Israel's genocide possible while doing occasional hand-wringing and sad face about how many Palestinians your weapons are slaughtering. Then there was Donald Trump, who the polling shows the vast majority of people in Israel want to win, whose allies are the staunch champions of Benjamin Netanyahu's band of extremists, who as president helped facilitate the Israeli far right's dreams, who uses the very word Palestinian as an insult, and who is the architect of the racist Muslim ban. Now, this disastrous state of affairs is despite the fact that, say, the polling shows Americans oppose Israel's onslaught by a big margin, that most Democratic voters rightly think Israel's committing genocide against the Palestinian people, and over half of Americans think US arms shipments to Israel should end until the onslaught against Gaza is finished. Ended, that is. That Israeli war crimes end. Where is the political representation for these people? Now, I'm here covering the US presidential elections, both in the run-up and in the aftermath. You can support this project. We're paying brilliant videographers to make videos going out and about, which we're about to go and do now, the videographer, to talk to ordinary voters in Wisconsin, as well as really interesting people, public figures. I'll be going next to Dearborn in Michigan to talk to Muslim Americans who traditionally vote for the Democrats. You can click the link in the video if you want to support that. Let's start with this truly vile intervention from Bill Clinton, the former US president, and of course husband to failed Democratic presidential nominee Hillary Clinton. This was in Michigan, which has the largest Muslim population in the United States.
Let me talk about the hardest issue here in Michigan is the Middle East. And I have to be careful what I say because there's only one president at a time and none of us can get ahead of where we're going. But I think we're going to have to essentially start again on the peace process. And I understand why young Palestinian and Arab Americans in Michigan think too many people have died. I get that. But if you lived in one of those kibbutzim in Israel, right next to Gaza, where the people there were the most pro-friendship with Palestine, most pro-two-state solution of any of the Israeli communities, were the ones right next to Gaza. And Hamas butchered them. And so then the people who criticize it are essentially saying, yeah, but look how many people you've killed in Ritalin. So how many is enough for you to kill to punish them for the terrible things they did? That all sounds nice until you realize, what would you do if it was your family and you hadn't done anything but support a homeland for the Palestinians, and one day they come for you and slaughter the people in your village? You would say, well, you'll have to forgive me. I'm not keeping score that way. It isn't how many we've had to kill, because Hamas makes sure that they're shielded by civilians. They'll force you to kill civilians if you want to defend yourself.
Okay, well, this is both disgusting and insane. Why is this man doing a stump speech in support of Kamala Harris, where he supports Israel's genocidal onslaught in Michigan, of all places? What he says here is obscene. The utterly dismissive way he talks about the mass slaughter of Palestinians, with no effort to conceal the fact he doesn't think their lives have even a fraction of the worth of Israelis. He talks emotionally about the slaughter of Israelis, but not Palestinians. He says, I understand why young Palestinian and Arab Americans in Michigan think too many people have died. I get that. The use of the passive died there, as though they got killed by a hurricane, rather than being bombed or shot or starved or burned alive, suffocated under rubble, blown apart, and so on. He can't even say he thinks too many have been killed, rather than say died. Let's just take on this nonsense about human shields. He actually says Hamas forces Israel to kill civilians. This is truly disgusting apologism for war crimes, deliberately absolving the US ally of Israel for its responsibility for the mass slaughter of civilians. You can rightly condemn Hamas for war crimes committed on the 7th of October. The evidence for the use of human shields is simply not there. They wouldn't be able to maintain any level of popular support or acquiescence if that were true. And guess what? The evidence simply has not been produced for it. Pre-war Gaza was one of the most densely populated places on earth, an open-air prison. And Israel has detonated the equivalent worth of several Hiroshima bombs there. What would human shields have to do there with the mass killing that we've seen? The argument here is that what Israel judges to be military targets are located in civilian areas. Well, firstly, what Israel considers a military target is deliberately all-encompassing to provide a rationale for the mass destruction of Gaza, as now overwhelming abundance of evidence shows. Secondly, even if you think there's a legitimate military target somewhere, you can't just blow it up and kill everyone. It has to be proportionate to military aims. You can't just treat civilians with contempt, even if that rationale were true. And thirdly, recently when Iranian missiles targeted Israel, broadcasters spoke in shocked tones about how Mossad headquarters were being targeted, which could mean civilian deaths, significant civilian deaths in Israel, because it's located in a civilian area. As indeed, I would note, the IDF headquarters is surrounded by civilian apartments, shopping malls, you name it. And guess what? That's the same in country after country. Are these countries also using civilians as human shields? And also, guess what? There's overwhelming evidence of Israel using Palestinians as human shields, because that's right, every accusation is a confession. Even the likes of CNN and the New York Times have covered this, despite their overall scandalous coverage of this genocide. President Clinton could simply have read the New York Times piece entitled pithily, How Israel's Army Uses Palestinians as Human Shields in Gaza. It details how one Palestinian detained for 10 days was then released without charge, but he was used as a human shield. This was back in March. Let's read it. Mr. Shabir, then 17, said he was forced to walk handcuffed through the empty ruins of his hometown Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, searching for explosives sent by Hamas. To avoid being blown up themselves, the soldiers made him go ahead, Mr. Shabir said. In one wrecked building, he stopped in his tracks. Running along the wall, he says, was a series of wires attached to explosives. The soldiers sent me like a dog to a booby-trapped apartment, he said. I thought these would be the last moments of my life. He was a high school student. CNN also documents how the Israeli military forced Palestinians into booby-trapped homes and tunnels to protect their own. And there's multiple other examples of this evidence. What is grotesque is Clinton speaks with humanity about Israelis being slaughtered, but not about Palestinians, who he clearly frames as collateral damage, however many are killed, despite the overwhelming evidence of Israel doing indiscriminate bombing, destroying most of Gaza's infrastructure, so it looks like a different colour and texture when looked at from space, as well as overwhelming evidence of Israeli soldiers deliberately shooting dead innocent civilians, including kids, destroying the entire medical system, preventing the essentials of life from entering, committing hideous torture as well as rape. We could go on. He also suggests Israelis have a right to express grievance when justifying Israeli violence, but not in the case of Palestinians. Decades of ethnic cleansing, mass slaughter, occupation, siege, colonization, mass incarceration, torture, we could go on. None of that relevant to him. Here's another truly diabolical excerpt from Clinton's speech.
Let me talk about the hardest issue here in Michigan is the Middle East. Hamas did not care about a homeland for the Palestinians. They wanted to kill Israelis and make Israel uninhabitable. Well, I got news for them. They were there first. Before there was, their faith existed. They were there. In the time of King David, and the southernmost tribes had Judea and Samaria. So here's what I want to tell you. I'm going to do everything I can to convince people that they cannot murder their way out of this, neither side. You can't kill your way out of this. And they have to make a new beginning. But when I read that people in Michigan are thinking about not voting because they're mad at the Biden administration for honoring his historic obligation to try to keep Israel from being destroyed, I think that's a mistake, because Donald Trump has shown what he wants. But Kamala Harris has said that she will try to negotiate an end to the violence, an end to the killing, and a new peace process, and that ought to be enough.
I mean, where to begin? Let's do the low-lying fruit. Harris said she'll try to negotiate an end to the violence. He said that ought to be enough. Oh, okay, Americans disillusioned over a Democratic administration containing Kamala Harris, having now facilitated over a year of genocidal mayhem. Like, why can't you just take Harris at her word? What's wrong with you? As for the rest, goodness me. This historical revisionism is grotesque and it is racist. He tries to make out this is a religious conflict. It isn't. It's about an indigenous people being murderously emptied from their land. The fact he refers to the West Bank as Judea and Samaria, using the same theological term as the Israeli far right, to suggest what is illegally occupied territory was given by God to Israel. That should say enough. And his argument here that Judaism predates Islam, what argument is he even making? If he wants to go there, does he not realise that the majority of Palestinians are the descendants of the Jews of ancient Israel? They then subsequently converted to Christianity or Islam. In the end, that being more the latter. But notice how he, like so many others, erases Christian Palestinians. As it happens, a large proportion of both Palestinians and Israeli Jews share genetic roots. If you want to go there, you can trace them back, all of them, to the Canaanites who inhabited that land. What Clinton shows here is racist contempt. It drips with Islamophobia, but more generally anti-Palestinian racism. Now, Trump's trying to exploit all this, saying he'll stop the destruction and suffering in Lebanon, promoting the idea he'll bring peace, while his allies brief that he'll get the onslaught against Gaza to end by the time of his inauguration. Don't believe him. His record speaks for itself, and his idea of peace is the same as the Israeli regime. Use overwhelming murderous force. As the Roman Empire put it, they create a desert and they call it peace. Very bleak, but I'm here to report the truth. As I say, we've got professional films made by brilliant videographers looking at what's going on the ground thanks to you. The first here in Madison, then Dearborn, in Michigan, then Pennsylvania, North Carolina, all before the election. Then we'll go around the US, elsewhere, depending on the results. Obviously, we're paying these brilliant videographers properly. It's very expensive. If you want to support this, as we offer a alternative to the corporate media, then you can click on the links in the video, patreon.com/OwenJones84 or ko-fi/Owen Jones. Very excited to release the first of these videos, the next thing published on the channel. Then there'll be one of these videos each day, so stay tuned and give us support if you want to pay these videographers properly for their brilliant work. Press like, subscribe. I'll speak to you soon.